Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
Job creation, lawmakers weigh in on different ways to get people back to work. And a presidential pick to a national committee. Next in Capitol Report. Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Julie Bartkey with this week's Capitol Report. Trying to expedite job creation was the intent behind a request for a special session. Senator Tom Bakk proposed lawmakers come back in December to get a bonding bill approved and get people back to work more quickly. Governor Tim Pawlenty does not agree with that idea.
We have $1.5 billion in unused bonding capacity. And so we'd be happy to talk to Senator Bakk and to see if he can put some metrics around more precisely what he think he could accomplish in the month of January. But if the goal is to call the legislature, and then have a window of time that's essentially 30 days before the session would normally start anyhow, that's obviously just silly.
We sat down with Senator Bakk earlier to talk about his proposal. Here's that interview. Senator Bakk, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be on.
Now, you did propose the idea of a special session to try to get a bonding bill passed in December. The governor said, it was pretty much dead in the water. Understanding that your intent is to get people back to work, how do you try to proceed now with the same plan, knowing that there won't be a special session?
Well, the challenge with a bonding bill is once you get into the legislative session, oftentimes governors hold the bonding bill hostage to get something else in the budget negotiations. This governor has done that previously. Governors before him have done that. They'll just say, well, I'm not going to sign a bonding bill until we get some of these budget issues resolved. And you can't get one passed into law. And that's my concern about waiting until February. The bonding committees of both the House and the Senate have been touring the state. The House Bonding Committee will be done by the end of November. The Senate Bonding Committee, I believe, will be done on December 2nd. I just don't see a reason that we then put all that work on the shelf and we wait around for February to start putting a bill together, and then likely it gets all tied up in the budget negotiations, and we'll know how much additional state deficit that the state has on December 2nd when our revenue forecast comes out, but we're going to be underwater further. And I'm just very concerned that we get into session, the bonding bill becomes kind of the bargaining chip, and we're still sitting around here in April or in May and we haven't passed a bonding bill. And then what happens is, if we had a bonding session now and we got this out of the way, and it wouldn't take very long for the governor and the legislative leaders to agree on what are the projects that all three of us agree on, House, Senate, and governor. And let's pass them. And let's get that work in the queue. Let's notify the authorities that are going to receive state bonding. And a perfect example is a new terminal building up at the Duluth International Airport. It's in my district. We've got a large piece of federal money. We put some bonding into it last year to relocate the parking lot. That work's under construction. The new terminal building is going to get built in the existing parking lot. That project's going to happen because there's significant federal money. It's shovel ready. I believe the governor will propose it in his bonding recommendations. I've talked with Senator Langseth about it. Certainly the Senate is going to have it, and I believe the House is going to have it. So there are projects like that all over the state that it would be very easy to find an agreement on. Pass them now, and then over about the next 90 days, as those projects get advertised for bid, as contracts get awarded, as contractors mobilize, by the time spring comes around in April, those projects will be ready to start construction. If you wait and the bonding bill gets held up in the budget negotiations, and you wait till April or May to pass a bonding bill, it's going to be August or later before you get the construction started on these projects all over the state, and we're going to have missed half of the construction season at a time when I'm told by both contractors and building trades union members that the building and construction trades in Minnesota is going to be 50% unemployed by Christmas. Somebody has to do something. And when we know we're going to be doing projects, why not do them sooner, get those contractors to work earlier? And
yet, given that these are unprecedented times, do you think history really will repeat itself, or do you think there might be a renewed push, even on the part of the governor, to get a bonding bill passed a little quickly and maybe not use that as the final tool of session?
Well, I think some of it depends on people's willingness to compromise. But so far, at least, I think the governor's been pretty unwilling to compromise. I mean, his strategy has been, kind of his way or the highway. And he got his way this last session. He unallotted, he unilaterally imposed his own budget conditions of $2.6 billion of unallotments on July 1st. I think it will depend on two things. The parties willing to compromise, and how bad is the additional budget deficit that we're going to see on December 2nd. It's pretty clear to me the governor's not going to agree to additional revenue to solve the state's budget problems. So how difficult is it going to be for us to find, let's say that deficit is $500 million. It certainly could be that, it may be more than that. That's a significant budget hole, considering all of the work and the reductions that were made last session. To put now an additional $500 million or more in additional cuts on is pretty difficult. So I think some of it does depend on what the forecast looks like. How difficult does resolving the budget challenges become? Does the governor continue down his road of no new revenue? And I suspect he will. And
you've also advocated a loan guarantee fund approved through the legislature. Critics argue that that shouldn't be a function of state government, but why do you think it's so important as a part of this equation? These are very unprecedented times.
And I've talked with developers all over the Twin Cities who tell me that there are $2 to $3 billion of projects ready to go out there where owners want to build buildings or renovate buildings, but they can't get financing. And what has happened is, because of the home foreclosure crisis, the federal regulators have really tightened up lending standards. And what has happened is projects that would have been bankable a couple of years ago, for example, out at the Mall of America. Mall of America was looking at a $2 billion expansion, 7,000 construction jobs, doubling the size of the mall. And now that project is really sitting on the shelf. It's absent financing of some of the major partners that were going to be in that project. There are projects all over the Twin Cities and all over Minnesota that were going to happen, but now because of the new lending requirements in the federal regulatory scheme, now projects aren't financeable any longer. So you think it should be the state's role to help? So I think during these difficult economic times, there is a role for government to build a bridge to get what we know are perfectly good projects financed. And the only reason they're not financed is the regulatory overview has gotten more stringent. And there's other things in addition to the loan guarantee. I mean, I have publicly said I think we ought to make the sales tax on capital equipment an upfront exemption. Under current law, our manufacturing businesses in the state have, they pay the sales tax when they buy a piece of equipment for their printing business or manufacturing business, and then they later apply for a refund and get that money back. Now, Governor Plenty has delayed the refund, so they're not getting it back. But what that would do if we went to just an upfront exemption is it lowers the cost of capital by 6.875%. That's significant. I mean, that is money that businesses won't have to go out and borrow. So it helps put additional equity into a project that makes potentially a project more bankable, which may stimulate some economic expansion. All right, Senator Bakk, we're out of time. I'm sorry, but thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you very much. As we near the November budget forecast, lawmakers got a bit of a preview on how the big picture could play out. At a recent Balanced Budget Subcommittee hearing, Management and Budget Commissioner Tom Hansen gave a hesitant projection.
I know that we're down $223 million, and I'm concerned of what, that we will have another deficit and in the December 2nd forecast.
A GOP strategy in creating jobs includes listening to the concerns of business leaders across the state. The senator, credited with being the brainchild behind these roundtable discussions, is here now to give us a summary and a look ahead. Senator Joe Gimse, thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So why did you think that hosting a series of roundtable summits would be the right approach to take?
Well, as we were going through last session, certainly, and also early into the spring and summer, began to realize that one of the main constituencies in the state of Minnesota wasn't being heard. And that was, we felt, the business community and small businesses, large businesses, and we felt that, as we come out of any potential economic expansion, it's going to be those people who are going to drive that, and we felt it was necessary to get out and talk to them.
And when we spoke with Senate Minority Leader Dave Senjum a few weeks ago, it was after only a couple of meetings had even taken place, he stated that the chief concerns included the economy and the high corporate tax rate. Now, as more of these meetings have been held, are you hearing that there are basically the same concerns statewide, or do certain areas have specific concerns?
Well, those concerns have come out certainly at every meeting that we've had so far, but the nice thing about it is that the business community wants to talk, and they want to talk to legislators, and they are, and they're bringing out a whole host of other issues, including mandates and increased regulation on their businesses, increased taxes. They don't feel that they need to be burdened anymore, and they recognize that they're going to be a target. Corporate income tax is going to be a target as further discussions in the legislative session progress.
And so are they also coming to the table with potential solutions and not just concerns?
Well, there are some solutions that we've been working on for efficiencies. They throw out ideas that in a general context that we could take into consideration as far as being more efficient, doing things more like businesses do out there. And I think that's an important part of our formulation and what we should be doing on the state level as we continue to work through the budget problems that we have.
Can you give me an example of maybe an aha moment?
Well, it was at one of the meetings in Sauk Center. A local excavator came forward and said, when I want to dig a hole out here in west central Minnesota, I have to get a permit from 4 different agencies, pay 4 different permit fees in order to get that, to be able to do that, get approval from 4 different levels of government, if you will. That is an inefficiency that we can make a difference in the state of Minnesota. We should have one-stop shopping for that type of permitting process. We can consolidate that.
And so looking ahead to the next legislative session and the next budget cycle, are there some pieces of legislation that you think can be moved through relatively quickly, where maybe others might take a little more work and a little more negotiation across the aisle?
Well, all of it is going to take discussion and negotiation across the aisle. There are big bureaucracies and people who legitimately feel that they want to have a voice in, say, a project out in west central Minnesota. But what we need to do is bring those expertises together and find efficiencies and ways of making that happen. I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic that we can manage to make that happen.
Are you optimistic that there can be any legislation that comes from these meetings that can get passed next session?
Well, I'm always optimistic. The nice thing about the people in the business community is that they bring common sense business approaches to the table. As long as we as legislators are willing to listen to them, I think we can move forward with some good practical solutions.
Okay, Senator Gimse, thanks for your perspective. We want to talk to you more about this, though, when the meetings do conclude.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Businesses in greater Minnesota have some unique challenges. Slow internet is one of them. John Brune explains how broadband is limiting some business operations and some potential solutions.
Faster internet speeds are key to Minnesota's future economy. That's the message of a recent Minnesota Ultra-High-Speed Broadband Task Force report to state lawmakers. Many areas of the state, mostly in greater Minnesota, lack adequate broadband speeds to satisfactorily perform online functions, such as paying bills or general business operations, leaving many at an economic disadvantage. The demand for online services will only grow, according to a task force report, and as technology expands, the report says that people will depend more on things like two-way internet communications for medical consultations and educational and business services.
Expansion of broadband is one of the most effective public investments for economic growth. For every dollar invested in broadband, the economy sees a tenfold return. This is in the literature that we've seen. And nationwide investment in broadband infrastructure is likely to create or retain 1 to 2.5 million jobs in the coming years. With more than 80% of Minnesota's economy today wrapped into knowledge and service industries, high-speed broadband has the potential to unlock enormous economic growth for the state. Broadband also offers new healthcare and education opportunities through telemedicine, distance learning, online education, and other opportunities that are otherwise out of the reach for many Greater Minnesota's residents.
Minnesotans are used to immediate access to information, business, and other resources brought to them by the Internet. The state's chief information officer says because of that, they now have higher expectations for government services as well.
Since our citizens in Minnesota are used to online mode of conducting their business with the private sectors and in their businesses, they expect same kind of accessibility and availability from the government as well. Today, all our government services are dependent upon availability of and connectivity in a secure mode all across the state. Going forward, it's going to be key to having a robust digital cyber infrastructure upon which we can deliver those services in the timeframes that our citizens expect and demand.
Included in task force recommendations is a call for minimum requirements by the year 2015 of 20 megabits per second for downloading and 10 megabits per second for uploading, leveling the high-speed playing field for all Minnesotans. The task force also recommends a collaborative effort between the public and private sectors to finance the project. The Broadband Task Force report is seen as a beginning. It's now up to state lawmakers to decide if, how, and when faster internet speeds will become a statewide reality.
Here to expand now on that hearing, we have Senator John Dahl. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Let's begin by talking a little bit about the recommendations from that task force. In essence, we just heard some of them, but they do set a benchmark of 2015 to try to increase the broadband speeds across the state. However, it's merely a recommendation, so what do you think is a realistic goal for trying to get a level playing field across the state?
Well, the recommendations there are ambitious, but if you talk to the task force members, you'll hear that they are also, they believe, achievable. And the thing that I like most about this that gives me confidence that we can achieve this is that there's a broad base of stakeholders that have come together and actually signed their name on this document saying, yeah, we agree that this can be done. And that's really usually the hardest part, is to bring people together in agreement that we can achieve something, because it's going to take a lot of people coming together working toward a common goal. And they've done a lot of that heavy lifting already for us. So even though they're ambitious, I think they are achievable. We know that right now we rank like 23rd and 24th in the country in terms of speed and penetration with our broadband. And we want to push that up so that we're in the top 5 in the nation, top 15 internationally. And what that will allow us to do, it helps us with our economy. It gives us a position of being very competitive globally. Also, a big issue is going to be security. Cybersecurity is the emerging issue. I'm concerned about the ability of other nations even to be able to come in and disrupt our communications and data streams, and we need to be able to have a secure system within the state and across all portions of the state, so that we can keep our economy running and we don't lose valuable or have valuable data infiltrated. And in addition to that, we want to lift the whole overall quality of living in the state. We already have a high quality, but this will allow us to move it up to the next level.
And so what role do you think the legislature has in trying to move ahead with all of these different goals?
Well, I think in the report you'll see that the kind of the first steps here are to have the formation of a broadband advisory council. I think that's probably one of the things we will look at. I'm sure we will, and probably the one thing we can move forward. To establish that council so that we have a group that can kind of guide this forward over the next 5 years. It does have a deadline or a termination date of 2015, as well as meeting those goals. So this will allow us to have a group that can help kind of marshal the energies that are in the state and also shepherd this project to completion. I think that's a big part of it. And then establish the goals. I think that we found that with like the renewable energy standard, having a clear set of goals helps everyone to understand what the vision is and where we're going to go. And by doing that, we can start to bring in the different players, because it's going to be a multifaceted approach. Different layers of government, state, county, municipal, even federal, are going to have to work together to find what resources they have available, what they need, and then be able to strategize and work on their particular levels to make this thing work.
When you talk about resources, are you talking about personnel, finances?
All of the above, yes. Certainly one of the things that the next council, I guess, would be coming together with is bringing in experts on financing and tax policy and the like, so we can help to kind of bring in some new ideas, some innovative ideas on how we will go forward with financing this and bringing these partnerships together.
Do you think at this point most of that financing is going to have to fall in the private sector, or do you think the public sector is going to have to step up?
Well, we know that the public sector is, like all parts of our economy, is really challenged right now. So I think it's going to be some unique partnerships. So there's going to be a combination of things I think we'll come forward with. But a lot of the heavy lifting will probably come from the private sector. It already has. I think they've invested up close to $8 billion in our state in building this infrastructure. So we're going to need them to continue that trend a little bit.
All right, Senator Dahl, we're out of time, but we'll talk to you when this task force gets some of the recommendations are put in place.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Minnesota Senator Dick Cohn has been handpicked by the president to help guide a federal commission. We sat down with the senator for his inside perspective on that honor. Senator Dick Cohn, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you're a part of the President's Committee on the Arts and the Humanities. When you first learned you were selected, what were some of your expectations going in?
Everybody's new to the committee, obviously, with a new administration. Plus, this was a committee originally established by President Reagan in 1982. And the usage of the committee has varied from administration to administration. The President and First Lady, and the First Lady is the honorary chairman of the committee, want to take this to a higher level than it's been the last couple of administrations. So everybody's feeling their way. The Executive Director, Rachel Goslins, began working about 2 months ago. So we're just kind of feeling our way, but it's a committee that works in an advisory capacity to the White House on arts and humanities and related cultural issues, and in turn is advisory then to the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Commission on Museums and Libraries.
So define higher level. Would that be a financial standpoint, or would it be publicity?
It's not a financial committee. So we don't have any role in terms of appropriating money, otherwise...
No, but you do encourage private-public partnerships, so I was just wondering if that's part
correct.
of the equation.
I think the President and First Lady want their administration to be more involved with issues of arts and humanities. So my understanding is that the committee is going to be more active in terms of working with arts education issues, for instance, which is a big interest of both the Obamas, with some of the issues involving, as you mentioned, public-private partnerships relative to the arts, and would like us to be there as, again, in an advisory capacity, trying to provide our perspective on what we've done and how we think the administration ought to proceed. But again, because it's newly sworn in, we're all feeling our way, and that'll be the case, I'm sure, over the next several months. And
explain to me the dynamics of this particular meeting, because as we were talking off camera, the committee consists of everybody from Sarah Jessica Parker to Yo-Yo Ma to you, a state politician. So kind of give us a feel for the dynamics of that first meeting.
And that's how I viewed it. What am I doing with this group of people? Obviously, I've been involved in a very significant way relative to arts and cultural issues in Minnesota, and had some national attention for what I've done here, so I certainly have a role in the committee. But George Stevens Jr., who's one of the co-chairmen, who's a very interesting person and has been somebody who's been at the intersection of arts and public policy for many years, made it clear to myself prior to the meeting starting, and then to the entire committee, that for the first time they wanted a significant number of artists on the committee, and so that's unique. So it was interesting being in a committee setting. Obviously I'm used to committee hearings, but being in a committee setting with some of these folks, although to be fair, there were 4 people missing, 2 of whom were Sarah Jessica Parker, who was filming in Australia, and Yo-Yo Ma, who was performing someplace else. So those 2 folks weren't there, but the other artists were.
Now, according to the website, the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, as you said, it began in 1982, and it, in essence, works to initiate and support key programs, recognize excellence in the field of arts and humanities, and, as we discussed, the private-public partnership that surrounds it. So how do you see your role in this overall mission? Where do you see yourself fitting in?
Obviously, I've been involved here in regard to arts and humanities education. Certainly a good part of the constitutional amendment that we passed last year and that we implemented this year during the session is involved with arts access, arts education, arts outreach. So I think I've got something to offer in that regard. And because I'm the only elected official on the committee, can certainly offer a perspective in terms of the intersection of arts and humanities and public policy. So I'm hoping I can take some of what I've been doing here over the years and translate that to a national level in an advisory capacity.
And as you discussed, you're a very strong proponent of arts and the humanities. So any ideas on how maybe Minnesota can and will benefit from what you're doing in Washington, D.C. and vice versa?
I'm not sure Minnesota benefits directly, and I say that partly because, particularly with the legacy amendment monies, we're basically at the top of the country in terms of support, I think second only to New York State. And this is not the NEA, it's not the NEH, so there's not a grant-making ability back to the states. I'm hoping that I'll learn what else is going on around the country and get maybe a clearer sense of that, and maybe have some things I can translate back here. I think the intention of the president in appointing me was a recognition of the work I've done here, and allowing me to offer some perspective in that regard to the rest of the committee, and hopefully by continuing that with the president and the first lady. So I'm expecting that's kind of my somewhat ambiguous role right now, but again, I'll learn as this proceeds over the next few months.
Sure, and you talked briefly about money, and I want to know, in your opinion, given tighter economic times, do you think arts and humanities funding, public funding, should still remain, still be a priority, or do you think other things tend to rise to the top of the list?
I've never said during the course of time I've been involved with these issues that it's at the top of the list. K-12 education is at the top of the list. Public safety is a higher priority.
So do you see funding waning then, perhaps, as the economy gets a little bit tighter?
In terms of Minnesota, no. And that was the purpose of the legacy amendment, was to take areas that historically have been underfunded, the environment, arts and cultural programs, habitat preservation, and provide a stable source of funding for those areas, because whether it be good times or bad times, those areas are always given a short shrift. If we had large surplus monies, we wouldn't be giving the money to those areas. The priority areas of K-12, higher education, public safety, health and human services will always take the money, and rightfully so. So the legacy amendment was an effort to provide some stability over the years, irrespective of where budgets are. But it's not the priority. I think it's something that makes a difference to the state, makes a difference to people in the state, and is something that has made a difference, certainly in terms of Minnesota, to the rest of the country, but it's not at the highest level here.
That's going to wrap up this week's program. From all of us at Senate Media Services, I'm Julie Bartkey. Thanks for watching Capitol Report.